My name is Tracy Lynch, and I am a late bloomer. I taught myself to read when I was about 3 years old, me and Sesame Street. I always sensed in my little soul that I had to lead my life, that I was responsible for myself. From a very early age, I spent a lot of time alone while my mother slept. My parents were very hard workers, and she was a nurse that worked all kinds of shifts and never really seemed to get enough. The first picture I ever saw of me was as a 4-month-old. In the photo, I'm holding a book to my chest that says, How to Raise Parent. I never knew what that meant until I was an adult. It turned out to be a prophecy. So that feeling I had as a young child of having to be responsible and silent and someone who stayed invisible and out of the way and who didn't cause trouble and did well in school, it persisted throughout my teenage life and into my 20s and 30s. I was always a voracious learner. I was excellent in school, grade school, all the way through high school. But in my junior year of high school, things changed. My father was diagnosed with cancer when I was 16 and given 6 months to live. I remember the day we went to the hospital to hear it straight from the doctor's mouth. I remember the look on my father's face today as he tilted his head to one side and thought something that I'd do as well. He pursed his lips together. I didn't know it then, but he was measuring his life. He was calculating God and calling bullshit. When I got my permit to drive, I immediately started helping my mom drive my dad to the doctor's appointments that lasted all day at Edward Hines VA Hospital in Maywood, Illinois. I would call out of school pretty frequently, but it never hurt my ability to earn scholarships. But it did have another profound effect on me. Times that I could have been developing peer relationships or attending peer events that other kids were participating in, I was busy taking care of family business. I did go on to earn 3 academic scholarships, one in California, it was a full ride, one in Tennessee, and one in Mississippi. The 2 in the South were 50% scholarships, and I asked my parents which they thought I should accept. In my heart, I was very mindful of finances, and I didn't want to cause them any financial harm. I knew they were already doing everything they could for us. My dad didn't give an opinion. He didn't want to sway me one way or another. But my mother, being from the South, did have an opinion, and upon her advice, I accepted the scholarship to Jackson State University and HBCU. I left home with my mom, taking care of my dad and my younger sister, who was 12 at the time. And while I wanted my freedom, a sensation I'd never felt before, I also understood there might be hardships for them without me there. My time in school was very short-lived. I made it through 1 semester. While I was back at home on winter break, my mom suffered a massive stroke that left her paralyzed on her right side. She couldn't talk, she couldn't walk, she couldn't feed herself, she couldn't do anything. Things got really tough, but I do not regret this. There were times we wanted to give up. Therapy was hard, day-to-day living was hard, getting around our house was hard, getting her to the doctors was hard. But we made it, and a year and a half later, she was fully recovered. Now, my dad, who had been given a death sentence a few years prior, was still with us, stronger than ever at times and sometimes not so good. But he did lose his vision to glaucoma. While I was thinking about navigating my way back to school during a particularly bright season, my mom had another stroke and things got hard all over again. In the meantime, when I was 20, I got married and I had 2 awesome kids, 20 months apart. There was a whirlwind of work. I finally went back to school. I was pursuing my bachelor's degree. My dad was up sometimes and down sometimes, hospitalized with surgery caused by side effects of cobalt treatment. And my mother would go on to have 3 strokes. There were times when I would call an ambulance for my mom, and then I'd have to call another ambulance for my father. There were times when my mother was in one hospital in Aurora, Illinois, and my father was in the hospital in Maywood, Illinois. There was one time when both of my parents were in the same hospital up the hall from each other. Neither would behave. And my dad was trying to wheel himself around blind, trying to There were times when my dad called me in the hospital and then called and told me to break him out, which I totally did. This was 16 years of my life. So many shenanigans, so much love, so much time I spent being a late bloomer and learning things college could not teach me. At the time, I didn't see myself as a late bloomer at all. I don't even feel like my life was being stunted or held back. But when I look back on it now, I see what 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds were doing during those years, and I can see that I was kind of in a holding pattern. As society would see it, I was late to the party. But something remarkable happened to me. I learned how to manage business, affairs. I worked with Senator Paul Simon's office to get my father's service-connected disability benefits. He'd been denied for his Army injuries suffered in World War II for over 40 years. I was 17. I could multitask like nobody's business, filing insurance claims, dealing with Medicare, scheduling appointments, making sure that everybody's health was in order, making sure that the kids were where they needed to be and had what they needed to have, and my schoolwork was done and dinner was cooked and medicines were poured out. I learned to manage workflow, create strategies, become creative. I became the ultimate project manager. I learned so many lessons that college could never have taught me, and I don't regret it. I don't regret being in that pattern. I learned selflessness. I learned how to give. I mastered patience. I learned how to manage my emotion. I learned tact. I learned when to keep my mouth shut. I learned how to be an advocate. I took some tough shots, and it was hard, but I do not regret it. Something else happened to me when I was going through all this. I graduated and I started earning real money. I didn't do it on purpose, but I allowed my career to go to the highest bidder. Since I had so many responsibilities, it made sense to take jobs that paid the most money. So I did. Then the more money I made, the more I wanted to make. I think I kind of saw myself and valued myself by how much money I made. The thing that was happening in the background was that I was not paying any attention to my passions or the reason that I was sent to the planet. That's why I worked in several different fields. I worked in Fortune 500 companies in telecom, in healthcare. I worked in pharmaceuticals, education, and I worked in city government. Unlike those kids who knew what they wanted to be ever since they were 6 years old, I had no idea what I wanted to be, so I followed the dollar. I didn't develop a common thread among my interests, sewing together what I love and what brings me joy and how I could earn a living. But since I'm such a late bloomer, I got to learn things from all different industries, things I would never have been exposed to. I know a lot about a lot of things, and I know a little bit about a lot of things. So I know a lot. That came from me doing so many different things. And that wouldn't have happened if I went straight to college and graduated when I was 22 and went straight into my field. And I am so grateful for everything. For all the ish I've been through, the mire and murky waters, because it has made me who I am today. I am patient, I am kind, I am even-tempered. I've been refined by fire. Things don't throw me off my square. I'm not depressed. I contain joy. I'm uplifted. I see grace in every moment, even if it doesn't feel good. And I am so grateful. When I look back on the 3-year-old reader, the 6-year-old narrator of her school play, the 2nd grader who carefully tore out the emperor's new clothes from her school reading book so she could keep the story forever, the 4th grader who finished the entire phonics program in a few months, the quirky violinist, and the little one with dirt under every fingernail, I see me, and I see now what I couldn't know then. I grew up in a garden. And at one point, I thought my dad was going to dig up the entire yard because he just kept expanding and expanding and expanding. I grew up among okra and squash and cucumbers and blackberry bushes and collard greens, tomatoes, and all kinds of delicious things. I didn't realize that the earth was being planted in me as I was planting in the earth. I love trees, and I could never explain my affinity for them, but that love was planted in me. As I got older, I still gardened and grew our food, and I still do today. And the great thing about that is I learned sustainability before it trended, before it became a buzzword. Through my life exposure to so much of what could have been described as sorrow, I've learned sustainability in my life. I've learned how to apply sustainability practices in my relationships. I've learned how to use sustainability in my health and in my work. And now I can say that my interest in the earth, my love for this planet, and my understanding of sustainable practices has truly launched me into a state in supernatural. That's why I can teach it. That's why I can help others become so effective and so strong without the brain damage to go with it. I had to go through a lot to get it. And I'm so proud of myself for finding out who I am and standing flat-footed and immovable on my platform. And I just want to share that with other people. I am a late bloomer, and I am a great bloomer. I am a perennial bloomer who does not flower in a burst of color, only to fade and die each season. I am a comeback kid with flowers that blossom and burn more brilliant each every year. And I have the petals to prove it. So I'll leave you with this. In gardening, there's a saying. When you plant certain plants, the first year, they sleep. The second year, they creep. And the third year, they leap. Human beings are just like that. Sometimes it takes us a little while to get our roots laid down, to figure out our space. I have to encourage you today that if you're someone who considers yourself a late bloomer, in the sphere of time, we're all still on time. And I hope that you'll start today whatever is planted in your heart to give to the planet. Because as long as we have breath in our body, the will and the dream, it's just not too late.